For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation.
Global computer systems are slowly coming back online after a massive tech outage caused chaos and confusion around the world. From broadcasters to banks, stock exchanges, and airlines, the outage also affected healthcare systems, with many hospitals forced to cancel surgeries.
So, did anyone get anything done yesterday? No? That's what I thought. For those who missed it or somehow weren't impacted by this, on Friday, July 19th, the entire world basically shut down because of an outage at CrowdStrike, as in a cybersecurity company that is used by a ton of companies powered by Microsoft. You've probably never heard of this company before Friday, but now they're the biggest company in the world for all the wrong reasons. I'm not great with tech and the intricacies of the issue, but what was supposed to be a routine software update turned into anything but that, as some sort of malfunction during the update made it so that any computer that was running on Microsoft now did not work. Whatever bug was in the code ended up breaking the computers that ran on it. Any flights that ran on Microsoft systems were grounded. So basically, every major airline. Any banks that ran on Microsoft systems had people struggle to withdraw their money. Any teams that used Microsoft for sporting events had fans struggling to access their mobile tickets. Heck, if you're watching this video, you are either impacted in some way by the CrowdStrike outage, or you know someone who was impacted by the outage. Now, everything should be back to normal now, and there are going to be many questions asked in the coming weeks, months, and even years about mainly why an outage from one third-party company should be able to shut down the entire world. But global productivity was in a terrible spot, and if you're watching as of this video getting released, not a lot of people could get stuff done. However, speaking of getting stuff done, that's exactly what we do right here on this channel, where we post every single day about the weird and wacky history of the NFL, bringing to light some stories that you might not know about. So if you like that sort of stuff, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post on the channel. Help us try and get to 60,000 subscribers. Thanks in advance for your support. And immediately in the wake of the CrowdStrike incident, football fans thought about other notable power outages that happened during games where everything shut down and things did not work. Of course, you've got the blackout at Super Bowl 47 at the Superdome, delaying the events in the middle of the third quarter for 34 minutes. You've got the infamous game in 2008 between the San Diego Chargers and the Buffalo Bills. You've got the blackout at Candlestick Park in 2011 between the San Francisco 49ers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. You've got the outage at the 1996 AFC Championship between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New England Patriots. But while you probably know about those, or at least a couple of those, you probably don't know about the one we're going to talk about today, as in this game right here, which has been lost throughout NFL history 35 years later, but deserves a deep dive today in light of recent events. Because imagine a tree having the power to impact an NFL game and disrupt everything in the process. And that's exactly what happened during a 1989 game between the New Orleans Saints and the New England Patriots. And this is the story behind the forgotten power outage and the forgotten disruption that you probably didn't know about and haven't heard of until today. Before I talk about the actual incident in question and just how bizarre it was, we need some context to understand the importance of the game, as well as how the game itself was going. It's November 12, 1989. It's week 10 of the NFL season, and as we're firmly into the second half of the year, we've got an interconference battle on our hands up in Foxborough between the New England Patriots and the New Orleans Saints. This is the first meeting for these teams since 1986, when the Patriots won 21-20, and you can learn more about that game by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And today's game is an awfully big one for both of these teams. For the Saints, they find themselves at 4-5, one game back of a handful of teams at 5-4 for the final wildcard spot in the conference. Their chances of winning the division are shot at this point, with the San Francisco 49ers running away with the NFC West at 8-1. But their playoff hopes are still very much alive. Even though the Saints started the season off with an abysmal 1-4 record, if they could win this game and get back to 500, then they would have a legitimate chance at the playoffs, and would have a chance at accomplishing one of the greatest single-season turnarounds at the time in NFL history. For the Patriots, they were also in a very similar boat, as this was a must-win for them. Despite some high hopes for the Pats entering 1989, this season has not gone according to plan at all, as New England finds themselves at 3-6, having dropped 3 of their last 4 and 6 of their last 8 games. And with a slew of teams at 5-4 and 4-5 fighting for wild cards, the Patriots truly have no room for error. New England, in essence, has to run the table to have a shot at making the playoffs, and head coach Raymond Berry even said as much to his team in practice before the game. So a loss here, and their season is pretty much over, and they can start thinking about the next decade. And sure enough, in the battle between two desperate teams who needed a win after getting off the slow starts, it was the Saints who prevailed, as New Orleans won the game by a final score of 28-24. To New England's credit, it would have been extremely easy for them to lay down, especially after falling behind 28-0 in the second quarter. So for New England to score the final 24 points of the game, including 2 touchdowns in the final 3 minutes, and make it close and respectable is no small feat. But at the end of the day, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And it's no surprise that the Saints won when you consider the fact that New England turned the ball over 4 times. They lost the time of possession battle, and they lost all 3 of their fumbles. It also didn't help that starting quarterback Steve Grogan had to throw the ball 59 times, which was an almost unheard of number back then, making Grogan have one of the highest single-game passing attempt totals in NFL history at the time of the game. Grogan only completed 45% of those passes. He did not play well. He just had to throw because the Patriots were so far behind. The Saints got back to 500 with the win. The Patriots had their season basically end, and for the fans at Foxborough Stadium who wanted the season to come to an end so that 1990 could happen since things couldn't possibly be any worse, they would have no idea just how much worse things could get. However, as you're watching footage from this game and watching the Saints get the win, you're probably noticing something about the weather. It's not necessarily that it was cold. 47 degrees isn't great, but it's not terrible for a November football game. Rather, it was the fact that it was extremely windy. You had gusts of 20 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour, and even 40 miles per hour. And with winds that strong, not only is it going to be very tough to play football because of the flight pattern of the ball, but loose articles are going to be flying. Heck, the broadcast even led off with the fact that the wind was going to play a massive factor during this game.
Temperature is 46, but the wind chill 4 degrees, and the wind is gusting at 40 miles per hour, and that will be a factor indeed this afternoon.
Little did the broadcast team know just how much of a factor it was going to be, because that statement by Dick Stockton was going to be the understatement of the century, because the heavy winds impacted the game in more ways than one. I'll put it that way. After the Saints got a pick 6 in the second quarter, courtesy of Brett Maxey, and they took a 21-0 lead, we were at 35-mile-per-hour winds, with the winds being absolutely relentless and having not let up since kickoff. And immediately after Morten Andersen hit the extra point to go by 21, it happened. The power went out. What happened was 5 miles away from Sullivan Stadium, still in Foxborough, there was a tree that fell on a power line on Elm Street, a residential neighborhood. This tree impacted the power not just on that street, but for the entire town of Foxborough, and for Sullivan Stadium, because when that tree went down at 1:51 Eastern, immediately the power in the stadium went off, and nobody knew what to do. Fans in the stadium began banging on the glass of the press box in disgust, not just at the team's poor performance, but at the awful state of the stadium, widely considered even in 1989 to be one of the worst in the NFL, as they screamed, "We want our money back," not realizing that this wasn't a stadium issue, and rather was a town-wide power outage. Remember though, you can't exactly blame the fans for thinking that this was a stadium issue and not a town issue, especially back in 1989, when there were no smartphones and internet for fans to get information up to the second on what was happening in the world. And this was especially true because this wasn't even the first time in a decade that the power went out of the venue, because in 1983, during a college football game between Boston College and Alabama, the lights went out, so there was a history here. This time, however, it was not Sullivan Stadium's fault. It was a fault of a tree that fell as a result of the winds and knocked down the power lines. Now, I should note that during all of this, compounding the matter even more was that a second separate incident occurred where a transformer in Foxborough caught a blaze. At 1:51, the power at Sullivan Stadium went out because of that falling tree. But at 1:30, just 20 minutes before, there was a transformer that caught fire in Foxborough. Let's just say that if you were an employee at Massachusetts Electric, November 12th, 1989 was probably not a good day for you. You thought you were going to relax? You thought you got the day off? You thought you could enjoy the weekend and watch some football? Think again, because you were on your toes. So the officials had to make a decision. CBS had no television feed at this point. Viewers who were watching this game were treated to a static screen. The stadium had no power, meaning that not only did the press box have no power, making it tough to do administrative duties, but meaning that the scoreboard had no power. And it's kind of tough to play football without a scoreboard, a play clock, and a game clock. And the officials had no idea how long the power was going to be out. If they knew it was only going to be a short delay, then it would make a ton of sense for them to not play while the power was out and just wait until everything got restored. But if this was going to be a long delay, then delaying the game could be disastrous and outright dangerous. Because remember, this is November in the Northeast that we're talking about, as in the time of year where the clocks move back an hour and the sun goes down earlier. The sun was going to set at 4:26 Eastern. If the lights were on, obviously, that's not an issue. The NFL plays games past sundown all the time, and if they didn't, then Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football would not be a thing. But you can't play a game in the dark with no lights. And the last thing you want to do, from a player safety standpoint, a logistical standpoint for accommodations, and a consumer standpoint, is have the game start on Sunday, delay it, and pick it up on Monday in the afternoon. And with that, because the officials had no idea how long this power outage was going to be, and because they had no way of communicating with city officials during the TV timeout, they decided, even though no one on TV would be able to watch, to resume the play. They had to get this game in before sunset, just in case of anything, and just in case the lights never ended up working. While the scoreboard was not operational, the officials were able to use an on-field clock, and for however long the power was out of the stadium, only the people inside Sullivan Stadium would be able to watch what was happening, although radio coverage wasn't impacted a whole lot by this. Which raises the question, why have you probably never heard of this outage? We've heard about tons of outages before in NFL history that are remembered, like Super Bowl 47 and the Bills-Chargers game, which got a mini NFL Films documentary on it. And you got the Jaguars-Chiefs error in 2019, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. So aside from the fact that this game was between two teams that didn't end up making the playoffs, and this incident took place 35 years ago during a regionally televised game, why is this one not entirely remembered? Well, that's because the power was only out for 14 minutes. Again, if the game officials knew that we would only be without power for roughly the standard length of halftime, the game probably gets delayed in all likelihood, and everything resumes a few minutes later. In the grand scheme of things, this delay was short. It was so short that if you imagine the power going out by the time this video started, it was restored by the time this video ends. At 1:51, the tree fell down on Elm Street, and the power at Sullivan Stadium was knocked out. At 2:05, everything was restored. The game continued on during that time period, and about 8 minutes of action occurred where no one could see what was happening. However, unfortunately for CBS and the viewers at home, a lot happened during that time period that was not caught on camera and has basically been lost to history. Because while the power was out, the Patriots muffed a kickoff, Dolan Hilliard scored a 10-yard rushing touchdown for the Saints to make it 28-0, and the Patriots got their first points of the game after driving down the field, with Bob Perriman scoring from 1 yard out on a rushing touchdown. This was the first rushing touchdown of Perriman's career, and there is no existing footage of it because of the power outage. It's not as though nothing happened. 2 touchdowns and a turnover happened while the power was out. The New England Patriots were not a good team in 1989, and they played a lot of boring games. So it's an incredible piece of irony that of all the times for Patriot football in 1989 to be somewhat exciting, it was the time when, quite literally, no one could watch due to a power outage. And like I mentioned before, the game between these two teams behind me right here was not the first time that the power went out at Sullivan Stadium in the middle of the game, and it would not be the last time, because not even a decade later, in January of 1997, during the AFC Championship game between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New England Patriots, play was momentarily stopped when the power went out inside Foxborough Stadium. The game had to be stopped because of television obligations and because the game was taking place at night, and you kind of need lights to be able to play the game. You can learn more about that and the disaster that was the 1996 AFC Championship by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And again, what happened in the Patriots-Saints game, these two teams behind me right here, it was not the fault of Sullivan Stadium. It was a town-wide power outage. But it is bizarre that it seems like a good chunk of these incidents happened to involve the Patriots and Sullivan Stadium. In the grand scheme of things, this game that you've been watching this whole time between the New England Patriots and the New Orleans Saints meant absolutely nothing. Neither the Saints nor the Patriots made the playoffs, and the game got overshadowed by a ton of other games that happened that week, including the 49ers' demolition of the Falcons, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, the crazy second-half comeback by the Chargers over the Raiders, the walk-off win by the Broncos over the Chiefs, the walk-off win by the Oilers over the Bengals on Monday Night Football, and the incredible final 3 minutes of the Cowboys-Cardinals game, where the lead seemingly changed hands every 20 seconds. But 35 years later, this game lives on for having one of the most bizarre power outages in NFL history. 14 minutes felt like an eternity. Because in many ways, this game feels like an ancient Chinese proverb. If a tree falls and no one's able to watch the game as a result, does the game count? Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.